All right, so it's been a little while since I've recorded a video, but I wanted to point out something that has come out just recently for those of us who use the Zygo G106. What I've run into is a new version of the firmware that is coming out for the G106. It's actually going to be a firmware that improves some of the issues that people have run into, including poor EGC performance, things like that. So what I want to do in this video is go ahead and show both the version that I'm using, which I have updated to the 1.4. I've been testing it for a little bit, and now I'm going to go ahead and roll that back to the version 1.3 so you can hear what it sounds like. And I will say that in portions of this video, the audio is going to be poor. My microphone that I normally use has decided it's going to go on vacation, unfortunately, and it was overdriving very badly. So I had to go ahead and voice over the rest of this so you can hear my voice in a little bit better context. So we're going to go ahead and get into looking into some of this and really kind of dive in. I'll show you how to update the firmware. It's going to go ahead here. I'm going to show you the actual firmware that's on it at the moment, which was the 1.4. That was prior to me rolling it back, and I will go ahead and roll that back here very shortly. Now, I did find the firmware in a post on a Facebook group for the G106. I was one of the users there that had mentioned that they had obtained the firmware directly from Xiegu, and they'd applied the firmware, and it seemed to work out all right. So I went ahead and contacted that user and got the copy of the firmware to go ahead and update my radio. So what we'll do is I'm going to go ahead and get this rolled back. I'll show you those steps here in just a moment. And then once we do that, we'll go ahead, come back to the radio, give you an update as to what it sounded like at that point, and then we're going to go ahead and update the radio and come back to it so you can hear the difference in the audio. Now, like I said, the audio is pretty poor. What I can do is go ahead and insert better audio clips with this microphone over to the video as we go along. There I was actually showing the little flip-up stand that I made for this. It's actually a keyboard foot that was actually something that I printed and just stuck on the bottom of it.
And start
so currently the firmware is available. The original firmware, the 1.3, is available from Radiodity. It's the only firmware available. They don't have this out officially as of yet. So this is a beta firmware.
And I'm going to go ahead
and yes, I voluntarily became a beta tester just by downloading
my radio back to.
And so what we're going to do is download the version 1.3, and then what we'll do is go ahead and apply that 1.3 and roll that firmware back.
We'll actually go in, and we're going to back out of here real quick.
So what's happening here is that I've got all the software there.
Okay.
So what I'm doing here is I actually went ahead and launched the newer version of TerraTerm. I believe it's 4.96, and went ahead and configured everything in that version of TerraTerm instead. Hi to the gnome there. I've actually got my COM cable plugged into the PC there, which that was actually a great purchase that I made. A little $10 HP ProDesk. So when you go in to set this up, you need to identify which COM port your COM cable is coming up on. Mine happens to be coming up on COM 3. I've already done this with another radio, so I know that COM cable on this computer is coming up on COM 3. And then what you're going to need to do, you'll need to go in and select your serial port to configure your serial port. And that is actually found up there toward the top. It's actually going to be in the the setup menu. You'll select serial port and then select 115.200. Once you've done that, then you can go ahead and set the radio into what's called DFU mode or firmware update mode. You'll hold the power button or hold the volume button and press the power button until the green light comes on. It's very brief. About a half a second will do it. Now that green light is on at this point, so what we're going to do is start the firmware load process. Pardon the mess. We're going to go back up to the computer screen, hi to the gnome again, And let's zoom in just a little bit so we can see what's going on. There we go. And now what we're going to do is we're going to hit number 1 to update firmware in Panic. So what you do is when you hit that number 1, it erases your firmware that's on the radio. And that's where the panic sets in. It'll take just a few seconds to go ahead and wipe that radio clean. And once it does, you can go ahead and then select File. And we're going to select Transfer, X Modem, and Send. Zoom out so you guys can see this just a little bit better. There we go. Now, in here, I made a critical error, and I will own up to it, but I didn't. You need to select that 1K checkbox down in the lower left corner. Make sure that that is selected, and then also make sure that you load your firmware from the unzipped file. Initially, I didn't do that. I made the mistake of loading it from the zipped file, and strangely enough, I tried to do it. Well, what happens with that is that it'll fail. It'll take forever, and it will fail. So what I ended up doing here is I ended up cutting away, figuring out my error, and coming back into it. And we'll get into that just about now. Now we're getting back into where I show where I actually grabbed the unzipped file, and we're going to load that unzipped firmware to the radio. So we'll click on that, send it toward the radio here. There we go. Now, one thing that I did here is that I did not relaunch TerraTerm, which I should have. So what it's going to do is it's going to load, and we're going to see the outcome of that here in just a moment, because I made an oops. I had half loaded the firmware and went back into it and didn't reload TerraTerm at all. And so we're going to notice that I get an error here in just a moment, which is where panic set in, and I thought I had bricked the radio. Well, one thing about the Xiegu radios, funny thing is, they're actually fairly hard to brick. I have another radio sitting here that I picked up that somebody had said that they had bricked. And funny enough, it took me about an hour, but it's up and running. Works great. So now that I've finished the load of the firmware, let's go ahead and go back down to the radio. Check out the mess, look outside. Hey, look, printer parts. All right, there is the radio. We're going to go ahead and unplug power. And we'll unplug the COM cable. And let's turn the radio on. Let's see what happens. Oop, there's the red light. That is what you don't want to see. That is a failure to boot. So with my load of the firmware, that's where I failed. So what's going to happen is that I need to go ahead and reload the firmware again. And we're going to go ahead and repeat the process so that way we can make sure that the firmware is loaded correctly. So we'll go ahead and get that all hooked back up. Hold the volume button, push the power, green light, load the firmware. Look at my ugly mug in the picture there. All right, the firmware is loaded at this point. Now we're going to go ahead and plug that COM cable. We're going to unplug the COM cable, plug the power back in, and boot the radio. So right here is where I'm going to have a little bit of a problem demonstrating what was going on. What was happening is that when you would key your mic, and say, for example, you're in the middle of a contact with somebody, when you would key that mic, what would happen is that you would actually run into where you would get this massive spike in audio, and then it would seem like the AGC was catching up. And you would get a really loud burst or static crash or something else, if you're in a pileup trying to get somebody on Parks on the Air, you actually run into where you get a giant spike of somebody else's audio coming in, and if you're wearing headphones, it actually is painful. So what I tried to demonstrate here is that function being a problem. Well, with the audio problem that I ran into, unfortunately, we weren't able to demonstrate it. There are videos on YouTube showing this, and it's something that was reported as problematic. So what I ended up doing is I tried to show this a couple times. I did get a chance to have it happen a couple times, and then we went ahead and reloaded the firmware. So let me go ahead and skip forward to that. All right, at this point, the firmware has been reloaded. We're going back into the radio, and we're back in the same location to listen to an ongoing QSO that's there. And one thing that I noticed just in testing again, when you would just tap the PTT button, previously, about 30% of the time, you would get this big spike in audio, and then it would roll back like the AGC is catching up. Once I made the adjustment to the new firmware, or once I loaded that new firmware in, it completely took that spike away. It's like the AGC kept its level, it kept where it was supposed to be, and it kept the level that it was originally at prior to pressing the PTT. So I tested a few more times here. No changes in audio level. Actually, the audio coming out of the speaker to me sounds clearer and sounds louder than it did on version 1.3. I don't know if they've tweaked the overall equalization of that audio coming through or what they may have done, but it does sound to me better. I do use a little hood, as you can see up there on top, that actually directs that sound toward me. But even without the hood in the shack here, it was actually sounding quite good. So just something I wanted to point out on this. We'll go ahead and look at the menus. They really haven't changed. You don't get any other additional functionality. All the submenus underneath the screen are the exact same. We'll go ahead and show those here for just a second. We'll scroll through them. So as you look at it, you can see, you've got your standard S meter plus the waterfall, or water. I wouldn't even call it a waterfall. It's more of just a spectrum. But when you go in, you're going to get your regular menu. You've got VFO and memory mode menu, which is all the same. AB, memory write, memory clear. You've got your next menu is going to be your CW settings. Your third menu is your key speed, your key type, and your call sign. And then you get into your fourth menu, split, display, which is where you can select your different types of S meter, waterfall, or scope, as they call it. You actually have your beep on and off, your firmware version right there at the end, which this one now shows 1.4. And then the last menu that you're going to run into is actually going to be for your wide FM, which is your standard FM radio. You're going to get into your band. It's more like a band pass or your band stack. Then you have in that last menu, you also have your mic gain and your transmit power. And the transmit power is the same. You still have that high, medium, low. I don't have a meter right now to go ahead and show that, unfortunately, but it is something that I went ahead and I've tested it previously, and there are other people that have tested as well. Now, I did show the microphone there just briefly. What I have done with my microphone is made a small modification in where the microphone is, or not necessarily where the element is, but the plastic over the element. I've actually drilled that out slightly so it lines up better with the actual element, so it comes through better as audio. So that's actually what I wanted to show you guys this video. Unfortunately, I apologize for the audio not being there. If the mic would have cooperated, we would have had a little bit better audio, but unfortunately, we're at the mercy of that mic being an absolute pain. So if you guys found anything educational, entertaining, or otherwise, feel free to leave me a comment down below if you want to follow along on the journey. Of course, there is that subscribe button down there, and we love a thumbs up when you get a chance to. And we'll say 7-3s for now, and we'll see you in the next one.
014.2550 megahertz USB